Thank you very much to the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson. I recognize the presence of Member of Parliament Nyan Gatsby-Dolly and my colleague, Member of Parliament Stuart Young, who just presented. My task is to raise just two issues with you, members of the media and the national public of Trinidad and Tobago. But they are two major issues impacting today's headlines and impacting the public attention, attracting the public attention at this time, and rightfully so. The first is the government's reaction to a comment that was made in Washington, D.C. about Trinidad and Tobago in response, apparently, to political protests that were taking place in that city. Never in a million years would I have imagined that a foreign official would speak disparagingly about this country and a government minister would give approval or endorsement to those disparaging comments. It was bad enough when they ill-spoke this country when they were in opposition. It is far worse when they endorse negative comments about this country while in government. But it's even worse than that when the minister with responsibility for external affairs, and now the prime minister as well, have been endorsing these comments. Listen, we have no army really to defend the good name and image of this nation. We rely on our diplomats, our representatives, and government ministers and officers of state to defend and uplift the national brand and image at all times. And our foreign minister in particular is the custodian of our brand in overseas engagements. This really cuts to the core of his duties. I didn't think he would go as low as he did when he had boldly declared that he'd found an immediate solution to the UK visa imposition, and that was many months ago. But here we are, applauding as Trinidad and Tobago was used as a negative example in a domestic political exchange in another country. And I think he went so far as to say that he was unbothered by the negative references. Unbothered? But I have a lesson today for compatriot Minister Sean Sobers. The lesson is this. In foreign affairs, even if you're responding to a negative, you can create a positive, particularly if your response is diplomatic and prudent. You see, the Western media houses give significant coverage to the words of senior officials in Washington, D.C., and they also would give significant courage to global reactions to those comments. So instead of merely applauding when a negative is used about Trinidad and Tobago, we should be saying this, and I'll give an example. We in Trinidad and Tobago heard the name of our nation being used in another capital as an example of high crime in response to protesters. But listen, that is not the full picture about us and who we are. Yes, we have challenges with crime like many other countries, but we also have many advantages and assets. We have many advantages and assets in Trinidad and Tobago. We may not be a superpower like you, but we do have some superpowers, such as our diversity, our creativity, the greatest carnival in the world, the greatest street food in the world, such as doubles, and you can really pile on the positives. So that's really a way that you can take a negative, turn it into a positive, and ride the media coverage, as opposed to merely applauding or saying that you're unbothered when the name of your nation is used in such a negative reference. And in that way, we could be actually positively covered by CNN or The Daily Show or Colbert Report or wherever else, or even Fox News. We should never applaud or be unbothered when our nation's name is becoming a negative caricature in any foreign political discourse. The right-thinking and patriotic citizens of this nation have been speaking out on this issue. We heard loud and clear the excuse from Minister Sobers that, well, he thinks the Vice President was talking about the PNM, the PNM Trinidad and Tobago, or the Trinidad and Tobago of the PNM. Now, what is that? Is that a serious comment from a government and a cabinet minister? And here's another lesson for him. There is no such thing as the Trinidad and Tobago of the PNM or the Trinidad and Tobago of the UNC. We have one nation here, a united Trinidad and Tobago. And when serious countries engage with us or reference us, they are engaging with the state and not any political party. So leave those references to our domestic discourse. And when engaging with others, there is no PNM and UNC Trinidad and Tobago. So it's no good to justify any negative references to this country on the basis that you can read the mind of a foreign official in a foreign capital and draw a conclusion that it was a reference to a PNM Trinidad and Tobago. That is unintelligent, and it does no good to the national standard and the national image overseas, of which you are the custodian. Now, the other significant issue relates to the three distinct and differing positions from within the government of this country on the issue of Venezuela and the US deployment of significant naval assets at this time. These assets include 3 guided missile destroyers and several other very powerful military vessels. Minister Sean Sobers, Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar, and former PNM Minister, now Ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago to CARICOM, Mr. Ralph Maraj, all gave in the space of about 24 hours 3 bizarrely different takes on this particular issue. And we are left, the national audience is left, and the regional audience is left to try to decipher a cogent and coherent foreign policy from 3 contradictory positions. Minister Sobers said, hands off, we are neutral, we're not getting involved in that. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar gave her full support and endorsement to the US deployment at this time. She went a bit further, which I'll describe shortly. And, well, Ambassador to CARICOM, Ralph Maraj, spoke in some detail about regime change in Caracas. Very unusual. Now, he's not ambassador to Caracas, He's ambassador to CARICOM. He's not talking about CARICOM. He's talking about regime change in a sovereign neighboring state. In reality, what these 3 officers of Trinidad and Tobago have been doing is making a mockery of generations of hard work that has gone into crafting and building a credible and respectable foreign policy for this, our beloved nation. You'd recall the words of Errol Barrow, who's one of the founding fathers of CARICOM, along with Dr. Eric Williams, Forbes Burnham, and Michael Manley. We must be friends of all and satellites of none. Friends of all and satellites of none. That is not an anti-American position. And I hope the government is listening clearly. That is not an anti-American position. That is a pro-CARICOM position. That is not an anti-American position. That is a pro-Trinidad and Tobago position. In international affairs, We have always been punching above our weight class. But now under this government, we are punching ourselves and our CARICOM colleagues as well. Now look how the Prime Minister dismissed CARICOM in his statement. And this really was extremely unfortunate. It was a very poorly crafted statement in general, lots of repetition and littered with grammatical errors. But one line really jumps out. The Trinidad, and I'm quoting, the Trinidad and Tobago government has not engaged and has no intention of engaging CARICOM on this matter. She is speaking as the Prime Minister of a founding member state of CARICOM and also the Prime Minister with lead responsibility for regional security in the quasi-cabinet of guess where? Of CARICOM itself. That is a repudiation of her duties and responsibilities to our regional family. The Trinidad and Tobago government has not engaged and has no intention of engaging CARICOM on this matter. And she goes on to declare very boldly, recklessly, and completely out of place, each member state can speak for themselves on this issue. In other words, every country for themselves. Who is she to make such a declaration? Especially when we in this country have worked so hard to uplift and build the profile of the very same CARICOM. And we've always taken our responsibilities extremely seriously. Clearly, she is not. So we as an opposition have to condemn in the clearest possible terms those words and the disregard the Prime Minister of this nation is showing to the Caribbean community. And it's really unfortunate because, and I have to say sinister, because even as that statement was being released by the Prime Minister, there are efforts underway to mobilize CARICOM to examine these very issues toward building a consensus. So what she has done there over 24 hours ago is to fire a shot across the bow of CARICOM solidarity and literally sabotage our region's ability to form a consensus and craft a united position on this very significant matter. As we speak, the COFCO, Council basically of Foreign Ministers of CARICOM member states, is being assembled in an emergency meeting to treat with this very issue. When 24 hours ago, the Prime Minister of a founding member state has said, we have no intention of engaging CARICOM on this matter. Each member state can speak for themselves. And we will have some more to say about that in the future, but we want to underscore how reprehensible that statement was and those comments in particular. Remember, this same Prime Minister basically sold us down the river a few months ago when she publicly stated that we have adopted the policy of Washington, D.C. when it comes to relations with another sovereign state. Our policy is their policy. Again, these are unprecedented times with respect to how Trinidad and Tobago conducts itself in regional and international diplomacy. That was unnecessary and completely undermines our sovereign identity as a member state of the United Nations. And I'm glad we have the presence of the distinguished leader of the opposition today, because we need to remind this government that the last cabinet approved Trinidad and Tobago's candidature for a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. That campaign is due to kick off very shortly. A successful campaign is supposed to elevate Trinidad and Tobago's voice and perspectives as a participant and a broker in peace and diplomacy around the world. That's what that campaign is about. Can this current government and prime minister do that with that reckless and ill-conceived, ill-advised policy or policies? What is our perspective? Is it that of a satellite state? Which version of our policy would we be taking to the Security Council? The foreign ministers, Ralph Marajas, or Kamla Persad-Bissessers? And we're forced to ask the question, who exactly is advising the prime minister on these matters? Where's the advice coming from? Is it coming from Port of Spain? These are valid and important questions, members of the media. And we saw phrases being used, such as, in that reckless statement, such as Trump derangement syndrome tantrums. That's not Trinidad and Tobago language. Those references don't form part of our media or public or even social media discourse. So we have to pay attention when the prime minister of our country is using phraseology such as that. Really, really bizarre. Trump derangement syndrome tantrums. I'm just quoting. Where's this advice coming from? The irony is that Trinidad and Tobago, on the eve of campaigning for a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, where we are broker now in international peace and diplomacy, has gone completely silent on the important issues of our times. Completely silent on tariffs and their impact on fellow small island developing states, SIDS. Completely silent on Gaza. Completely silent on Haiti. Silent on visa restrictions against the government of Grenada. Silent on the unilateral embargo against the Cuban people. Silent on sanctions and attacks against the ICC. And silent on all the other important issues of our times. We can talk a little bit about the lack of patriotism of this UNC government, but I think we'll reserve that for some comments a little later on. But I invite the media to go onto the website of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. It's available right now. And look at, under the caption, the foreign policy of Trinidad and Tobago. It's in black and white. And I can tell you that the pronouncements and utterances, the current prime minister and the current government are at variance with the foreign policy of the very country that they were elected to lead at this time. What is their policy towards CARICOM? We see that there's no, first of all, there's no ambassador to Caracas at this time. There's no high commissioner to Guyana. There's no ambassador to the United States of America. There's no ambassador to the Organization of American States. But there's an ambassador to CARICOM who's not talking about CARICOM, who's not talking about the CSME and free movement and the other priorities that we've helped build and fashion and design, but talking about regime change in Venezuela. Just to conclude, I saw some comments that maybe AI helped craft the Prime Minister's release. I'm not sure, because even if AI had been used, I would have expected some reference to international law in a statement like that from the Prime Minister of a country. Some reference to the United Nations Charter. Some reference to the OAS Charter. Some reference to respect for territorial integrity. Some mention of the principle of non-interference and non-intervention in the sovereign affairs of another member state. Some mention of Parliament being consulted on the issue of foreign troops, permission to be granted for foreign troops to be stationed in Trinidad and Tobago on our soil. Some reference to Trinidad and Tobago's role within CARICOM. And I want the media and the public to spare a thought for our representatives and diplomats who are overseas at this time, seeking to represent this same Trinidad and Tobago, who are under strain to interpret and explain these varying and reckless pronouncements to overseas parties, bodies, organizations, and member states. they are under pressure due to the recklessness of this government. How do you explain and interpret these things? Right here in Port of Spain, I can tell you that there are members of the diplomatic corps who are amazed and befuddled by what has been taking place and the general naivete coming from the government of Trinidad and Tobago on this matter. And I have to keep asking, who is advising them? You all would remember an issue that we spent a lot of time on with reference to the OPVs, the offshore patrol vessels. Now, you may ask, how is that relevant today, Dr. Browne? Well, it is very, very relevant, as I checked. And at the time, these were the words of this same Prime Minister, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, when she canceled the OPV contracts. You'd remember those vessels were part of Trinidad and Tobago's response, indigenous response, to coordinate with CARICOM colleagues in pushing back against the same drug and narcotics efforts taking place. I quote, "Do we need 3 OPVs?" This is Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar at the time. "Do we need 3 OPVs? The country is not at war out in the seas. The country is not at war out in the seas. The country is at war on the ground, in our streets and in the towns within Trinidad and Tobago. The money could be better spent on education and money for the police." That's the same UNC that is now clapping and cheering for, well, it's not 3 OPVs. There's the USS Gravely, the USS Jason Dunham, and the USS Sampson, and several other large foreign military assets being stationed in the Southern Caribbean to do what? To combat drug trafficking, according to the dispatch from the United States government. So I hope you can see the clear irony in the position and words of the Prime Minister then and her position and words now, because apparently there's a war out in the seas now that she's in support of. Unintelligent, inconsistent, unreliable, and lacking in credibility with respect to the use of marine assets to deal with the drug trade. I've just described the United National Congress. There's a lot more that I could say. The last reference I would make is to Guyana, because I think the Prime Minister thought she was being clever. In the middle of all the cheering and clapping along, she included a little paragraph on Guyana. I think trying to say that a lot of this is about supporting Guyana. Well, we say yes to support for Guyana, and we've always been in strong solidarity with our fellow CARICOM member state, not in any unilateral guns of the Navarone style, but rather to work within the ambit of CARICOM, of which Guyana is another founding member, and with the Secretary General of the CARICOM Secretariat and with the government of Guyana on these challenging issues together. I would have expected a responsible Prime Minister in the current circumstances, given her role within CARICOM on security, regional security, to have convened in collaboration with the chairman of CARICOM a special meeting to generate a CARICOM position and response to recent developments. Instead, she's doing the exact opposite. That would have been a more responsible, prudent, and effective approach, as opposed to unilaterally, without even being asked, announcing via megaphone diplomacy, which is a particular style that has arisen in recent times. Megaphone diplomacy, basically announcing the availability of our shores for a particular type of military deployment. Never would we have imagined that Trinidad and Tobago would find itself being represented in such a reckless, uncoordinated, and ineffective manner. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are the two issues that I have been detailed to share with you. And I now hand over to the distinguished leader of the opposition, the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson.